So, Cyberpunk's a card game now. Or it will be. I have a pretty heavy interest in Cyberpunk. A couple months ago, I actually made a 2-hour video essay about it that you should definitely go watch. But suffice it to say, I really like 2077. I'm also a pretty avid Magic player. I happen to have not one, but 2 Magic the Gathering playmats here. Now I have to put them back. All this is to say that the Cyberpunk TCG is something that almost seems tailor-made for me, so I've been following it pretty closely since I learned about it sometime in January. They finally launched the Kickstarter last week, but I don't actually want to talk about that. I want to talk about the game proper. Obviously, if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would encourage you to do so, but you could also just wait for the game to come out and actually get a feel for it. The Kickstarter notably doesn't sell packs in anything other than booster boxes. No, I don't care much about that at present. While I didn't receive an alpha kit at Weirdco, if you want to change that, hit me up. I will totally play these decks on camera. But I did follow the Kickstarter to get access to the printable versions of them. So instead, I've been making people play with them that way, and I've played with them for a little bit now. I wanted to share my thoughts on the game and its mechanics. So let's talk about it. I want to say that I will also assume that you have some familiarity with the rules. If you want to learn how to play, I encourage you to go watch the video on the official YouTube channel that they put out. A couple other content creators like Main Deck also have how to play tutorials, both of which will be linked in the description. The most unique part of this game, from my perspective, are gigs. They end up serving a dual purpose in this game, as individual dice denote your score, and the values on them total to a number that some cards reference. In the starter decks, we mostly see this on things like V's Pistol and the Yorinobu Legend card. What I find interesting about this mechanic is that it's kind of split in two. On one hand, you have the accumulation of street cred, which incentivizes big numbers. I say incentivizes like you have a lot of control over it, which you really don't. So bigger dice mean bigger number, which means you have more street cred. But at the same time, another mechanic that seems like it'll be important is having gigs at max value. We also see this present in the starter decks on Jackie Wells, but it's also present on one of the preview cards, Carry Uridine. I like how this mechanic gives a pretty big significance to the smaller dice like the D4 and the D6, because it's trivially easy to get the D4 to max value, especially because Jackie actively increases the number on the dice by 2. As I understand the rules, there's nothing stopping you from just targeting the same gig over and over, so Jackie often just reads that you draw 2 cards a turn. Gigs are a neat take on a scoring system that ensures a game can't end faster than turn 5, assuming you take every dice your opponent has and never get hit back. At the same time, putting dice into your trading card game does increase the randomness in ways that some people might not be a fan of. Decks are already heavily rooted in randomness, so adding another layer onto that can mean that games feel like they're out of your control. I think it'll come down to how important street cred becomes and how available dice manipulation is, because we've already seen some examples of it. Both decks dabble in it to a degree, but it seems like there's a pretty heavy focus in the color identity of red. But I want to talk about color identity in a later video when we have more information. I think gigs are more complex than I originally gave them credit for, but there's a fine line between complexity and randomness, and I'm curious to see how they manage to toe that line moving forward. The thing I find most interesting about the game is probably the way deck building works. Your 3 legends dictate the kinds of cards you can play in your deck, above just which colors you're allowed to play. Of course, they do that too, but cards also have a RAM value in addition to a color requirement. This means that there is a tangible cost to putting yourself into multiple colors. As of right now, each legend offers 2 RAM in a single color, but given that cards have a RAM cost of 1, 3, and 5, it's all but guaranteed we'll see legends that probably have hybrid RAM to them. This means that powerful cards can be gatekept not just behind mana requirements, but RAM requirements. Magic the Gathering tries to do this with color requirements and casting cost, but in practice this isn't as effective because mana fixing is often so good that it just doesn't matter. With the Cyberpunk TCG, this is not a mere suggestion, but a hard and fast rule. You simply cannot put Atom Smasher in anything less than a triple yellow deck at this point in time. I like that there's a penalty for having a 3-color deck, that you can't run the more powerful cards in a color. There should be a consequence to getting to do that. While we're here, let's talk about the alpha decks. I've enjoyed playing with them, but there is a somewhat lesser degree of complexity to them. Now, I recognize that this is intentional. I've seen the Discord. I know that some people are coming into this game with little to no trading card game knowledge. Combine that with this being a new card game, and I understand that the complexity has to be low on something like this in order to teach new people how the game works without overwhelming them with too much information at once. The one thing I wish the starter decks had more of, though, was interacting on your opponent's turn. I like that kind of counterplay in card games, and I know that it'll exist in some capacity moving forward, as we've already seen at least one Quick Hack card, but I wish there was more you could do on your opponent's turn. As of right now, the only thing you can do is call one of your legends when attacked, which, does allow you to flip 2 of them during a turn cycle, because otherwise you're limited to just 1. Ultimately, I can't complain too hard, as I'd rather them focus on getting new people into this game, as that's what I think is most important. But it would be nice to have a little something more complex to help onboard experienced TCG players with what higher level gameplay can look like. I like the strategy of the game. I like the decision making when it comes to attacking and expending units, and I think it'll be more interesting once we start to see cards with exhaust abilities that we get to play. The last thing I want to touch on is the resource system. Magic has left a fundamental scar on the TCG community with its resource system, and I don't inherently mean that as a bad thing. I think that Magic can have some feels bad moments when it comes to not drawing enough lands or having a hand with too many of them. Cyberpunk TCG has 2 different ways to combat that. The first is that your legends spend for money, regardless of if they're flipped or not, so you'll always have at least 3 eddies to work with right off the bat. This helps increase the pace of gameplay since you can start playing bigger cards faster. Of course, you also have the other side, that certain types of cards spend for money, effectively making every single one of them into a modal spell. I like the decision making here of whether or not a program is worth selling or playing, as not every card is sellable, so you do still have limited options for ways to make eddies. But you're also not forced to just play a bunch of cards in your deck that make money. That being said, there are a couple of the cards in the starter decks that I feel like 9 times out of 10 are just going to be sold for money. The equipment are most useful. V's pistol is super good. But there are things like corporate surveillance and reboot optics that feel like they only have applications in very niche situations. All in all, we're still looking at this whole thing with very limited information, but I'm nevertheless excited to see where the game goes. I will definitely be following it closely and continue to talk about both the cards we've already seen, as well as whatever else ends up being spoiled. I look forward to building decks and talking strategy, and I hope to see you all there.